Rene, we're still at Techorama recording live from the conference venue. Um, our podcast is about building great engineering cultures. I actually saw a session yesterday here at the conference by a speaker who actually, the session was all about building engineering cultures.
Oh wow, that sounds cool, because I think what I read on the internet, there is actually a lot of different definitions and ideas about what an engineering culture is and how we define that. We have our own ideas, so I would say let's make an episode with another guest that can talk about that stuff.
Yeah.
Let's do it.
The Lead Podcast, a podcast for leaders in engineering, architecture, and development.
So welcome, Jennifer.
Thanks so much for having me.
Jennifer, you talk about engineering culture. Can you first introduce yourself a bit and then elaborate why you think engineering culture is important for companies to actually work on?
Absolutely. My name is Jennifer Wadella. I'm the VP of Front-End Engineering at Bitovi. Bitovi is a consultancy in the US, so fairly specialized in front-end development and application development. So I lead our front-end team. We're pretty heavy in Angular and React, but can pretty much tackle any JavaScript framework under the sun. I guess we'll do PHP if we have to, but JavaScript is our happy place. And my background is in, engineering. I've been writing JavaScript since before we were even building single-page applications with it.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a bit of my background. Been in the tech industry for a while, worked in a lot of shitty cultures. Have learned what I don't want to see in an engineering culture, and when I build them, it's given me some insights into what to do and what not to do.
Yeah, well, maybe just to dive into that, because you trigger me. Like I've worked in a lot of shitty engineering culture. So define shitty. What is for you a culture that is not so nice?
So I can talk about my talk a little bit, because it's really difficult to break down culture. It's this very ambiguous, kind of interesting topic to talk about, because it can be very, very hard to equate practically to different things. Like, culture makes you feel good. It's the warm and fuzzies, but that's very hard to understand from an application or business context. So when I talk about building engineering culture, I approach it from a couple different angles. Number one, I like to talk about what the outcomes are of a good engineering culture, because yes, it's a place that the engineers want to enjoy. But if you are going into a situation with an already poor culture existing where the engineers aren't happy, their happiness likely doesn't really matter to the people leading the culture. They would have figured this out by now. And so I tend to take the approach of like, hey, the ultimate output of a good engineering culture is good productivity that helps the business reach its goals through software engineering. So that's kind of the spin I take on it. And when I try and coach people on how to build engineering culture, first of all, every culture is going to be different, because your culture is defined by the people inside of it. And that's going to change from company to company. People are going to have different business objectives. They're going to have different software objectives, based on what they're trying to deliver. So understanding everybody's culture is going to look different but then there are some key tenets and pieces of culture that I think are crucial for a healthy or productive engineering culture. And so I tend to break down the topic into, like you would a sociologist approach, studying some sort of culture that you're not familiar with. You kind of break it down into pieces, which are values and beliefs, which are the base of a system that make up a culture. You have cultural norms, so the things people do, what taboos in that culture are, things that you aren't supposed to do that are kind of like intrinsically known. You've got your language and your symbols and your rituals.
Yeah.
And so I kind of approach talking about culture from each of those different elements. Like, these are the pieces that make up culture. This is how we go about starting to build good engineering culture, by looking at our value and belief system, looking at how those guide our decision making, looking at our norms, helping establish those, helping make sure we have documented our norms and our language and our symbols to make people coming into our culture able to grasp it more easily. And then talk about rituals that I think are important, things like one-on-ones, things like doing evaluations, facilitating team meetings and lunch and learns.
So let's pause a bit and wait. Start talking a bit more about those values. I see many software companies, they all have nice slogans with nice values. Um, how do you see this? Do you actually see companies that that actually execute the values that they talk about, or is it also a lot of fluff and not? Yeah.
I think you see both. And I definitely am one of those people who, depending on the company, I kind of have that initial like vomit reaction to their values because
Yeah.
it's like the thing you would see on a motivational poster, right? Like our customers come first or some bullshit like that. Um, but you're starting to see a lot of engineering cultures really think and then define their values very clearly. I talk about this in my talk. I give an example of the Netflix jobs page. If you go and look at their careers, they very clearly list out like these are our values. These are the things that we think matter. If you align against these, you're going to be a good fit for our culture.
Mhm.
So I think
really upfront selection already. Like if you do not like this, do not even try because you won't fit.
yeah. And so some of the examples that I make in my talk, like you have your beliefs. And so these are things that you believe to be true through experience or whatever. So an example of this for, an engineering team might be, I believe that more readable code leads to better code maintainability. And so then my value on top of that, let's say I'm in a code review or something like that, I'm going to value longer, more verbose lines of code that I think are more readable versus maybe like somebody just using a shorthand ternary operator because they want to save a couple characters. So I kind of talk about how your beliefs create your value system, and then your value system is how your team makes decisions. And so when used effectively, right, if your team is faced up against a difficult decision, but they're understanding your values and your alignment, it makes it easier for them to make a decision because they're like, okay, this is the thing I value. That's why we want to build or take this approach.
And how do you start like uncovering these beliefs and values? Is that something that you start with, like, okay, with a big workshop or something? Or is it something that you gradually do and start documenting? So more you structure the process on how to do it and not so much the content because that follows? Or how do you approach that?
I think you can take a couple different approaches because, companies will reevaluate their value system and say, hey, does this match? So I think some of it will emerge organically if you already have, a longstanding team. I'm in the consulting world. And so this isn't like a company-wide value, but something I've instilled in my team is technology is not the hardest problem we solve. The hardest problems we solve are people problems. And so that's kind of like our value system is while we prioritize being expert technologists, we're here to build better software. And that includes communicating with each other better, getting feedback from our users, making sure that we're facilitating better project management. And so that kind of helps guide cultural decision makings because that's where we're placing that value and that emphasis.
I think that's also the reason why we do this episode or do this podcast as a whole. People problems are the hard problems, right? Technology things there's always means to fix that fairly easy, but those cultural people kind of things, they always take very long to change, and are really hard to change.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and those beliefs and values, is that then something that you create with a whole group of people? So how do you make sure that everybody is on board with those things? Because
Yeah, I think it depends. Like if you maybe have like some leadership of a team, you're like, hey, we think it would be a really good idea to kind of sit down and document what we perceive to be our values. Or like if we're aspiring to change our culture, what would we like those values? Kind of sit those down, document them out, and then write out what they mean. So if you look at, for instance, the Netflix page, they'll have some sort of word. This is what this means to us. This is why it's valued. And so every company is going to kind of have that spin on it, right? But there are a couple just like core values that I think are important for a healthy engineering culture, and those are going to be the importance of creating psychological safety, importance of autonomy, importance of growth, importance of diversity, and having clear expectations. So those are some like underlying themes, and you can package them and wrap them different ways. But those are like kind of core tenets that need to be a part of your value system, in my opinion, for a healthy, productive, effective, scalable engineering culture.
Okay. So if you then have defined your beliefs and your values,
Yep.
So what's next?
So a couple different things. Number one, your hiring process is one of kind of like the best ways to curate your value system, because you can interview people and make sure they align against your values. The one thing I caution people about in their hiring process is to hire for culture add over culture fit. I don't know if you've heard of that, talked about that on your podcast.
Culture over.
uh, go for culture add over culture fit.
Okay.
So culture fit was the term we were using in his industry. Yeah, this person is going to fit in our team. They match our value system. Great on paper, but that leads to a lot of homogeny and prevents a lot of diversity of thought. So the idea of hiring based on culture add is, this person is going to fit in, but they're going to bring new thoughts and ideas to the table in a way that's complementary to what we have. And so instead of, looking for rinse and repeat the exact same kind of engineer, bringing different perspectives into that, are going to work together harmoniously, but aren't all going to be the same.
And there are some things that you just don't want. And of course, that you're still selecting only the people that fit in the good things that you want, but then in a more broader perspective, so you get more diversity and more broad opinions. And
So hiring is the great place to make sure that you're bringing in what you want. But then when you get into your rituals, those are kind of places that you maintain and establish. So one-on-ones, super critical for, managers to be dealing with their direct reports, but those are ways to touch base with what's going on in their world. If they're struggling, if they're needing help with conflict resolution, you can kind of help them understand the values, understand the way to approach problems. So that's like a source there. The way you conduct code reviews. Again, like to refer back to psychological safety, making code reviews a place that people feel safe to share code and to learn and grow from, instead of a source of dread and despair where people are going to get ripped apart for using the wrong variable name, right? Like those different rituals are how you, it's not how you enforce your culture, but it's kind of a byproduct. Like all these things are working together to create that culture. And so that's where it tends to come out.
So one more question about the hiring for culture.
Yep.
How do you compare like hiring for skill versus hiring for culture?
So it really depends on what you're looking for, right? I lead a team of consultants. And so I am going to, definitely lean heavily. They need to be very, very competent technically because they're going to be going to our clients. They're going to be acting as coaches and mentors. So I need them to not only be very, very technically strong, but I would rather somebody, if I'm looking at two candidates on paper, one's a little bit more technically strong than the other one, but the other one can communicate more effectively, particularly in a coaching manner, I'm going to go for that person because they can make up the technical gaps, but those kind of things of being a leader are much harder.
It's easier to train the technical stuff.
It is.
I think we have the same kind of principles. Culture and those kind of things are really hard to teach someone. If someone is a toxic person, it's do you really want to put in the effort of
trying to change? We are not we're not a psychiatrist, so that is really hard.
Do we want to fit in this toxic person? Maybe he is a 10x developer in technical skills, but do we really want to put in all the effort to make him less toxic and actually work with the rest of the organization? Well, if you have someone who blends in your culture automatically and has this more of these non-technical skills, consulting skills, being able to express what they want with their customers and get the right, know how to ask the right questions to the customers. Those things are really hard to teach him.
But on the other hand, that is the question to you. Like, how do you actually educate people on your cultural things? So you have your values, you have your norms, all that stuff, and then people come in. You have, of course, maybe documented stuff, but how do you reinforce? Is that only on the one-on-ones, or do you have different things there?
Different things. So, like I mentioned before, code reviews are a great example. So if you're, trying to make sure that your culture aligns in a certain way, hey, we're going to set expectations. This is how we go in to do code reviews. This is the kind of behavior we tolerate. These are our norms. And so that's where you kind of get into the social nuances of behavior. We are going to make sure that our comments are about the or about the code and not about the person. We're going to, call out positive things. And so by you setting expectations as a leader, as kind of the curator of this culture in those different areas, you can help kind of people get on board there. And the cool thing about culture is, it's a reflective of a group of people. And so it becomes self-perpetuating. And you will have, bad players. Like I've hired people before that they seemed like a great fit for us in the interview. And the person that walked into the job was just like a different egomaniac, like didn't see an ounce of the humility that I saw in the interview process. And so like it can happen. But those people, they don't end up, if they're not willing or interested in taking accountability for their own actions, they don't tend to fit into the culture, no matter how hard others try and teach them. But for people who are new and who are willing to do the work and take accountability, like they kind of assimilate to the culture without necessarily needing to be explicitly told. So, yeah, we've got a bunch of different things working for you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and if you then go in a company or in your own company, for that matter, so what are challenges you usually face when trying to really get everybody rolling this out, and yeah, let's say you are hired by another firm.
Yep.
They also say, well, we also need a little bit stronger engineering culture. So you come in, but what challenges do you face normally or
Right.
usually?
So challenge number one is like getting them to understand, because they don't necessarily equate what they care about to being a culture problem.
Okay.
So countless times, you know, we've had clients say, man, like your engineers are so good. Like, how do you do that? How do you make this happen? And these people also often have really toxic behaviors that are, you know, just completely dampening their team, like will not do anything to help empower team members to be autonomous. They're sitting there being very prescriptive. The way each developer should write a line of code. They refuse to put together like documentation or best practices or standards. They expect developers to be psychic. But then when you try and go to talk to them about changing these things, if they're of the opinion, well, things are good enough, like it's really, really difficult. If somebody's coming to you saying, hey, I think we have a culture issue, can you help? Oh, no brainer. That's really easy to go because they're already on board, right? It's the people who don't have good culture that aren't like, aren't noticing that.
They are usually asking for a different solution. Probably a technical solution, but it's not a technical problem. It's a cultural problem.
Yeah, and so then it becomes a game of understanding, okay, what are the things that they care about? What are driving the business? What are the pain points? Because a lot of times people are not going to be willing to change until they were faced with an actual painful output, right? A problem they see or deem worthy of solving, especially engineering managers. They don't... If they're not in tune with this line of thinking, they don't care about the warm and fuzzies, but you have to figure out what things they do care about and then try and align. Okay, well, if we make these changes in the culture, this is going to get you the end result you want to see.
I really like your idea of selling the engineering culture as developer productivity in the end, because that sounds like money for management, right? There's like, developer productivity, that means we need to hire less or we can get stuff done faster. And in the end, it also leads into being able to hire more easily if you have a great culture, etc. Right? So I think for people who are not really involved in the actual engineering stuff themselves, engineering culture sounds fuzzy and not really something they can work with. But if you talk about developer productivity, that makes it far more, then we can know that gives us these possibilities. It makes it tangible for those people as well.
Exactly.
I like that idea.
Yep.
So, but how does that relate because you also mentioned autonomy, for example, and people need to have autonomy and freedom to actually also do exploration and all that stuff. But how does that match, for example, with what goals, or sometimes you have organizations where there are strict planning or waterfall, or like this is how we do the stuff. So how do you see these autonomous teams working together in an organization that is maybe more led by project managers or all that stuff?
Well, so first of all, there's a difference between like autonomy and project management, right? Autonomy is the need for less managerial overhead for things to be done effectively and efficiently. So part of that is having to do a lot of work at the high level to set teams up to understand, okay, what are the goals? What are the desired outcomes? Make sure they're aligned on that, and then letting them figure out how to do that. So that's kind of like the autonomy piece to set up, because if you are not going to do that, you are going to be in a constant need of managerial oversight, and that does not scale. If you look at some of the research around managing direct reports, like you can really only maintain good relationships and have good insights with about 10 people. And so, unless you want to have a manager for every set of people and be involved in that deeper level, your company is not going to be able to scale effectively unless you have engineering teams that are set up to execute more autonomously. Now, when they're there, good project management helps facilitate better engineering and give more visibility, and then hopefully assist in the autonomy piece because leadership has visibility into what they're producing, what they're doing, without some manager like having to poke everybody one at a time and be like, "What's your status update? What's your
Exactly.
status update? What's your
But I think
status?"
that is the exact. So I like your take because normally the relation that most people have in their minds when talking about project managers, those are the people that you mentioned, like isn't done yet, isn't done yet, isn't done yet, isn't done yet.
Yep.
That is not the people that actually are good for autonomy feeling.
Yeah, and it definitely erodes that. And so part of this is okay, we know good culture leads to better productivity, but we can only truly measure that productivity with proper project management in place. And that's another thing that I see
Yeah.
people struggle with is they've got project managers that understand that like something is not happening quote unquote on time. Software, of course, it's not going to happen on time. But then they don't have visibility or understanding or insight into the work that's happening. And so it just adds to this churn and they can't really tell, okay, well, is the dev team actually quote unquote not productive? Why are they not productive? Is it because we don't have enough resources or we're getting blocked by significant things? And so you can really only tell that and then determine how to fix it when you have project management that gives good visibility into the work that is being done.
And you said you work for a consulting firm, right?
Yep.
So you do projects for your customers. How do you like bring some parts of the engineering culture also to those customers? Is that true? Also adding proper project management?
Absolutely. So, a couple things. My engineers are well trained. Like, hey, the second you start on a project management, go figure out what the hell their project management is. If they have no project management, that's something that we need to get around because consultants our clients are paying us based on the perceived value they have that we are providing them. And so, the clearer picture we can give them of the work that's being delivered and the likelihood that it's going to be delivered on time is what they care about. And so, we need to create that. Then on the flip side, we walk into a lot of places with terrible project management. So the biggest struggle we're facing right now is a term I've called burn down chart driven development.
Cool.
Yeah.
So are you familiar with the concept of burn down charts?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So,
Okay.
I've seen this, especially when Scrum Masters get too much power. They like these kind of charts, and then they will be the person like, isn't done yet, is it done yet, is it done yet? Oh, something is going wrong because the sprint is already done, and yeah, they don't focus on the value anymore. They focus on these stories that are in Jira or whatever tool you use, and not about the actual value that's behind these kind of stories, right? So yeah, I really dislike all these kinds of charts for any type of managerial use, right? So they should only be used for insights for the teams themselves, in my opinion.
Yeah, and that's a good way to explain it. So for anybody who's not familiar with the concept of burn down charts, let's say you are working in a sprint, some sort of Scrum format, right? And so in your sprint, you're basically saying, hey, we're going to commit to get this much work done. Whatever that output is going to be the velocity of the team, how much work they can put out and how much work they can put out in a certain increment. And so a burn down chart is kind of basically supposed to show how the project is doing. And a burn down chart should be going down over time because that represents the number of tickets completed. In an ideal world, we'd want all of our tickets completed by the end of the sprint. What happens is a burn down chart becomes equated with success. And so a stakeholder is looking at a burn down chart and they want to see it a certain way. And because a lot of project managers don't have as much training, they get more fixated on what those stakeholders think about this chart, and they get into this mode where they start to gamify.
Yeah.
And so, what happens there is they'll do some really squirrely shit with the dev team where they'll say, all right, we have this much in the sprint, we don't want any spillover. So either they're gonna, really be managing or setting unrealistic expectations for developers, or maybe they had a sprint with spillover before, when you're right, it should be insight, it should be visibility to simply tell us this is our velocity so we can have a better understanding of how much work a team is able to complete. They're going to sit there and they're going to say, oh, well, we had spillover and our burn down chart didn't look good last sprint, so this sprint we're going to underestimate how much work we have. And so they would rather a developer complete their tickets within the sprint and sit there idle for 2 days than do work. And so it's just completely backwards from, all right, we want to help our teams be efficient as possible. They're doing the exact backwards thing simply because they don't want their burn chart to look
I've even
bad.
seen it happen for developers as well, right? So they working on a ticket. So I'm working in the sprint. This is like the last ticket in the sprint that I will pick up. Sprint is still 3 days, so I have 3 days to finish this, right? Instead of I can fix it in a day, maybe I can pick something else up. Yeah, there's nothing left in this sprint backlog.
You get what you measure, right? That's always the hardest part. I think good project management can really help with that. But in an enabling fashion. The moment the charts become leading, then you're actually screwed.
And that's my whole thing is like, good project management should help us deliver software more efficiently. It should not hamper developers by having to implement these certain Scrum ceremonies because it's in the Scrum book. Is it helping us do a better job shipping software? No, yeet it. So,
So last question, because then we are already going to wrap up because we are already in half an hour in almost. So what would be the best advice that you can give an organization that is looking at its own culture and think, well, there are things to improve here. What would you say? Start here.
I would probably say, hey, what does an ideal culture look like for us? What does that mean for the people inside of it? What does that mean for our business goals and our outcomes? And then kind of work backwards to bridge the gap between what they're seeing and what they would like to see, and then figure out ways to orchestrate that. And, if you include links, I can send you a link to my slide deck because I kind of break out, hey, here are some of the different steps when you begin identifying this. These are these different ways.
Yeah, please do. Then we will add them to the show notes.
To think about facilitating.
So would you then pick a number of key players within your organization to help you define these values, etc.? As you said, we want to carve out these ideas, and maybe the leadership itself doesn't have all the things that the engineers know, right? So would you agree some of the key engineers or engineering leaders that to get the right answers?
And there needs to be a balance of engineers, because if we had our way, right, screw deadlines, screw whatever, we would spend all the time in the world to build the most perfect code.
We factor till you
and that's not a realistic expectation. And so it needs to be balanced between, all right, what's going to keep developers happy and engaged and feeling productive about their work, but in a way that is meaningful for the business. So
okay, great. I think good takeaway, and I think a lot of good learnings as well in the whole structure of I like the way how you really, the cultural things like rituals, behavior, norms, totems, or symbols, that is really nice to also approach organizational culture from that aspect. So thank you for that.
And it's good that it's being talked about these topics at tech conferences, right? So a lot of the sessions are about code and learning new technology things. And of course, that's what a lot of developers like. But as we said earlier in this episode, the hardest problems are often the people problems, right? So we can learn all these new techie things, and then we still run into the same problems. So I love people talking more about these subjects also for developer audiences.
So thank you for being with us and making time for this episode. Really enjoyed the conversation.
Yeah, thanks, Jennifer.
Well, I hope that the listeners also enjoyed the conversation. Let us know, and hope to hear and see you in the next episode of the Lead Podcast. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
The Lead Podcast, a podcast for leaders in engineering, architecture, and development.